I still remember the first time I walked into my in-laws' house after marrying my husband. The air felt heavier than I expected, thick with unspoken judgments, and the faint aroma of baked cookies couldn't soften it. My hands trembled, and I plastered on a smile that I hoped would appear confident, but inside, I was a storm of nerves. My mother-in-law looked at me with a slow, calculating gaze, as if measuring every detail, every potential flaw. And then, just loud enough for my husband to hear, she muttered, "She'll never fit in." Those words lodged themselves in my chest, sharp and bitter. For a brief second, I considered retreating, imagining I could escape the cold scrutiny. But I swallowed the lump in my throat, whispered, "We'll see," and in that moment made a vow to myself. I would prove her wrong, not through confrontation, but by quietly earning my place. The first few months were nothing short of grueling. Every meal, every family gathering felt like navigating a minefield. If I poured the tea the wrong way, if I didn't remember exactly how she liked the napkins folded, or if I laughed too loudly, there would be a subtle jab, a thinly veiled criticism. "Oh, you're helping with the chores? Don't get ahead of yourself," she would say, her tone clipped, her gaze sharp. And I'd feel the heat rise to my cheeks, struggling to hide my embarrassment. Even my husband, sweet and well-meaning as he was, often failed to defend me adequately. I began crying quietly at night, my pillow damp with tears, questioning whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But then, slowly, I began observing. I watched carefully, noticing patterns and unspoken family rules. I realized fitting in wasn't about changing who I was. It was about understanding their world and navigating it wisely. I started small with tiny gestures, remembering her favorite tea, noting which flowers she liked, quietly anticipating what would annoy her. I wasn't being fake. I was learning the rhythm of a household that felt foreign. I still remember the first time I felt a glimmer of acceptance. It was a chilly December evening. I had prepared my grandmother's roasted chicken recipe, nervously plating it and placing it on the table. My husband gave me an encouraging smile, but my mother-in-law? She raised an eyebrow, took a slow bite, and then paused. My heart pounded. Then she said, "This is actually really good." Just those words, brief as they were, felt like a mountain had been moved. It was a tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. Of course, acceptance wasn't immediate. There were still subtle jabs, whispers behind my back, and cousins who would smirk when I entered the room. "She thinks she runs the house," one would murmur to another. I could hear it, and it hurt, but I stayed silent. I knew actions spoke louder than words, so I threw myself into helping where I could. I learned the ins and outs of the family business, which was a small but growing property management company. I stayed late, studied budgets, timelines, contractor work, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I became competent enough that even skeptics couldn't deny my value. And then life threw me a curveball. I fell seriously ill, a condition that left me bedridden for weeks. The whispers intensified. Can she really handle family responsibilities? Is she weak? Even my husband's concerned frown conveyed doubt, though he tried to hide it behind supportive words. I endured long, sleepless nights, pain gnawing at my body, but I refused to surrender to despair. Every morning, I did my exercises, took my medication on time, and forced my mind to stay focused. Each small improvement was a victory, and with each step forward, I grew not just physically stronger, but mentally tougher. I learned that resilience isn't something you suddenly have. It's built in quiet, lonely nights where no one is watching. During this time, the family business ran into a crisis of its own. A major client canceled a contract, throwing everything into chaos. Contractors were complaining and tensions ran high. It would have been easy to step back and let the men take over, but I couldn't. I analyzed the situation, proposed new strategies, and presented solutions to both my husband and mother-in-law. At first, they were skeptical, but I persisted, showing facts, creating schedules, and even negotiating directly with clients. Slowly, we turned the situation around. That day, when my mother-in-law said, "You really saved this project," I felt a rush of triumph that made all those early struggles feel worth it. Family gatherings remain tests of patience. Cousins whispered, others questioned my ideas, and some tried to subtly undermine me in front of the group. "She thinks she runs the house," one would murmur to another. I could hear it, and it hurt, but I chose silence and strategy. I documented my contributions, maintained professionalism in every interaction, and focused on results. Eventually, the truth became undeniable, and the whispers faded. Even after my health scare, the challenges didn't stop. The family dynamics remained as complicated as ever, sometimes worse, because people tend to sense weakness and strike where they think they can strike. I started noticing the subtle ways my sister-in-law, Megan, would undermine me. It was never outright confrontation, but little comments designed to make me doubt myself. "Oh, you really think you can manage this property deal? That's ambitious," she would say with a polite smile that barely hid the sneer. I caught her one evening rolling her eyes when I suggested a minor adjustment to a contract. I felt the sting, but I refused to react publicly. Instead, I made a mental note, watched her moves, and quietly adjusted my approach. Meanwhile, my husband tried to be my anchor, but the stress of work and family sometimes clouded his support. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he truly believed in me, or if he was just being polite. I began to realize that for me to survive and thrive, I couldn't rely solely on anyone else's approval. I had to prove my competence to myself first. Every meeting I attended, every client I negotiated with, every family decision I contributed to became a test, and I refused to fail. The turning point came when the company faced a major setback. One of our properties suffered significant damage due to an unexpected flood. It was chaotic. Contractors were overwhelmed, tenants were frustrated, and my husband and father-in-law were panicking. Everyone expected me to step back, thinking, "She's already had her health issues, she shouldn't be involved." But I couldn't. I spent hours poring over insurance documents, contacting contractors, renegotiating deadlines, and calming tenants. Sleepless nights became routine. I survived on cold coffee, quick meals, and sheer determination. I learned how to compartmentalize my fears, acknowledging them, then setting them aside to focus on the task at hand. Of course, this didn't stop the whispering. Megan made sure everyone knew she was helping more than I was, framing herself as the diligent one, while subtly undermining my efforts. One evening, I overheard her telling another relative, "I don't know how she thinks she can run things. She's barely keeping up with her own life." I clenched my fists and felt anger boiling inside me, but I forced a calm smile when she looked my way. Later, when the repairs were completed successfully, tenants satisfied, and the insurance claims sorted out, it was my work that earned the praise. Even the most skeptical relatives had to acknowledge it. That moment was a turning point, not just in the business, but in family dynamics. Slowly, the very same people who had doubted me began seeking my advice. One evening, my mother-in-law came into my kitchen while I was preparing dinner and asked, "Do you think we should renovate the East Wing before the holidays?" My heart skipped a beat. This was the same woman who had whispered that I'd never fit in. I smiled, weighed my response carefully, and suggested a strategic plan, highlighting budget, timeline, and contractor availability. She listened intently, nodding in a way that I had never seen before. When she left, she patted my arm lightly and said, "I'm glad you're here." That simple gesture meant more than any award or recognition. It was a signal that I had earned a place of respect in the family. But the road wasn't over. Betrayal came in another form. My own cousin-in-law, Jared, began spreading rumors about me, trying to paint me as manipulative, as if my successes were due to luck or flattery rather than hard work. I could feel the tension at family gatherings, the subtle glances and the hushed comments. It would have been easy to lash out, but I chose silence and strategy. I documented my contributions, maintained professionalism in every interaction, and focused on results. Eventually, the truth became undeniable, and the whispers faded. Amid all this, my personal life was no less challenging. Sleep-deprived nights became a norm. Late nights handling contracts, early mornings preparing breakfast, navigating family drama, and managing my own health. My husband and I had arguments.
Quiet ones that left bruises on the heart, but never on the surface. He would sometimes question my choices, not out of lack of support, but out of concern. "Are you pushing yourself too hard?" he asked one night, voice low as I pored over documents at 2 a.m. I looked up at him, exhausted, and whispered, "I can't stop now. I have to prove I can do this. Not for them, not for you, but for me." That night, I cried silently, letting my tears fall on the pages of the contract I had been working on. There were also moments of joy, though they were rarer than the struggles. I remember the first birthday party I hosted for my niece. It was simple: balloons, cake, laughter, but it felt like a victory. The family, even the previously critical ones, saw me taking care of things, managing the details, and somehow everything ran smoothly. I realized then that small gestures of care could shift perceptions as much as big achievements. That day, Megan even approached me, a little awkwardly, and said, "I didn't realize you could organize all this. Good job." I nodded politely, hiding the satisfaction that bubbled inside. Every small recognition felt like a pebble dropped into a pond, creating ripples that slowly washed away doubts. And just when I thought things were stabilizing, another challenge arrived: a potential property investment that could either make or break our business. The opportunity was high stakes, the financial risk immense. My husband was hesitant, my father-in-law skeptical. Everyone seemed to expect me to take a back seat, but I couldn't. I spent weeks analyzing market trends, meeting with investors, crunching numbers late into the night. I considered every risk, planned contingencies, and presented a detailed proposal. After much discussion, everyone agreed to proceed based on my plan. Weeks later, the investment paid off beyond expectations. That success wasn't just financial. It was symbolic. It was proof that I could lead, solve problems, and earn respect even in a family that had once doubted every move I made. Through it all, I realized something profound. Respect isn't given, it's earned through consistent effort, patience, and resilience. And success isn't a single event, it's a journey littered with sleepless nights, doubts, betrayals, and quiet triumphs. I began to mentor younger relatives, helping my nieces and nephews navigate their own challenges, sharing lessons I had learned the hard way. My mother-in-law, who had once doubted me, now occasionally sought my advice on family matters. Even Megan, who had tried to undermine me, started to show subtle signs of acknowledgement, nodding at my suggestions rather than dismissing them outright. Life taught me lessons in unexpected ways. A health crisis showed me inner strength. Family drama taught me diplomacy and patience. Betrayals exposed me to real human behavior. And professional challenges honed my skills and resilience. By the time I looked back, the shy, nervous girl who first walked into my in-laws' house felt like a lifetime away. I had grown, not because I wanted revenge or to prove anyone wrong, but because I refused to let circumstances define me. And finally, the day came when I realized I had truly arrived, not in wealth or power alone, but in belonging, in respect, and in self-belief. The same relatives who had whispered doubts now came to me for advice, sought my guidance, and included me in family decisions. I smiled quietly to myself during one Sunday dinner, watching my husband and children laugh, knowing the journey had been worth every sleepless night, every tear, every subtle battle. I had turned crises into triumphs, doubt into confidence, and skepticism into respect. Looking back, it's clear that life's challenges don't discriminate. Illness, sleepless nights, family drama, betrayals, they touch everyone. But what makes the difference is how you respond. I chose perseverance over despair, action over complaint, and kindness over retaliation. And in doing so, I discovered something even more valuable than acceptance. I discovered the strength within myself. Even with the business finally stabilizing, life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. One of the hardest challenges came from a source I never thought would hurt me so deeply: trust within my marriage. My husband, though loving and supportive in many ways, began to drift emotionally, weighed down by the stress of work and family expectations. At first, I didn't notice. It was subtle, small moments that could be dismissed as fatigue. But gradually, late-night conversations became shorter, laughter grew forced, and I sensed a distance forming between us. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I pushed too hard? Was I asking too much? Or was there something I missed? Then came the day I discovered evidence that he had been confiding in someone else about our marital issues, someone I barely knew and someone who didn't have our best interest at heart. I felt betrayed, a twisting pain deep in my chest. Nights became unbearable. My sleep was fractured, haunted by thoughts and doubts. The very foundation I had worked so hard to stabilize seemed to be shaking. But instead of reacting impulsively, I took a step back. I reminded myself that decisions made in anger often worsen situations. I focused on gathering clarity, understanding, and perspective. In parallel, my in-laws' attitudes were still a complicated mix of respect and lingering skepticism. My mother-in-law, though more accepting now, occasionally slipped into old patterns, questioning my decisions or implying that I wasn't handling things properly. And even Megan would make snide remarks, thinly veiled as advice, attempting to undermine my confidence in subtle ways. And yet, I had learned that patience and action always speak louder than words. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I kept doing what I knew was right. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the respect that I had worked so hard for solidified. Then came the final major crisis, the one that could have undone everything I had built. My father-in-law suffered a severe health scare, a heart attack that left him hospitalized and the family in turmoil. Suddenly, responsibilities I had managed on the periphery were thrust squarely onto my shoulders. Bills needed paying, properties needed managing, tenants needed reassurance, and the family needed guidance through an emotional storm. It would have been easy to crumble under the pressure, but I didn't. I worked around the clock, coordinating doctors, ensuring the hospital paperwork was complete, managing property emergencies, and calming family tensions. Some nights I didn't sleep at all, lying awake on the couch in the quiet hours, my body screaming for rest, my mind racing with logistics and plans. At times, my husband would come in, exhausted and guilt-ridden, apologizing for not being able to do more. I held his hand gently and whispered, "We're in this together, but right now, I have to step up." It wasn't about proving anything to him, it was about keeping the family afloat and honoring the trust placed in me. During those days, I noticed something remarkable. Even Megan, who had long been a thorn in my side, started to step up in her own way, albeit begrudgingly. She began acknowledging my decisions silently, helping when asked without question, and occasionally even asking my input proactively. The very in-laws who had once doubted me were now dependent on my guidance, seeking my judgment in matters big and small. I realized that respect isn't just earned through grand gestures, it is also cultivated in moments of steadfast reliability, especially when no one else is willing to carry the weight. And then came the night when my husband and I had a long, honest conversation about everything that had transpired. The distance, the doubts, the almost betrayal. It was raw, painful, and yet profoundly healing. We spoke about fears we had kept hidden, about the insecurities and pressures that had silently festered. For the first time in months, we cried together, laughed together, and made a pact to support each other openly, without judgment. That night, I slept fully for the first time in weeks, not because life was perfect, but because understanding and trust had been restored. And with personal life stabilizing, I turned my attention to long-term family dynamics. I started mentoring younger relatives, helping my nieces and nephews navigate their own challenges, sharing lessons I had learned the hard way. My mother-in-law, who had once doubted me, now treated me as an equal partner in family decisions, often saying, "I trust your judgment completely." Megan, too, had evolved. She approached me quietly one day and admitted, "I underestimated you. You're stronger than I thought." Those words, though small, felt like a crowning victory after years of subtle battles and emotional endurance. Of course, life never stops testing you, and new challenges always arise. But the difference now was profound. I faced each obstacle with confidence, experience, and resilience honed through years of small victories, crises, and triumphs. Sleep-deprived nights were still part of life, but they no longer defined me. Business setbacks were inevitable, but I approached them strategically, armed with lessons from every challenge I had overcome. Family tensions arose, but I could navigate them with calm and empathy rather than panic or frustration. Then came the ultimate affirmation of everything I had worked for. One evening, my mother-in-law gathered the family for a casual dinner. She raised her glass, looked directly at me, and said, "I've been too harsh in the past. I doubted you, underestimated you, and perhaps judged too quickly. But today,
I want to acknowledge everything you've done for this family. You've shown strength, patience, and wisdom beyond your years. Thank you for being part of this family." The room was quiet, and every eye turned toward me. I felt a lump in my throat and tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. This wasn't just acceptance, it was recognition, earned through years of perseverance, courage, and quiet triumphs. In that moment, I reflected on how far I had come. I thought about the first day I walked into this household, trembling, unsure, and doubting myself. I remembered the nights of tears, the whispered criticisms, the subtle betrayals, the sleepless nights, the health scares, the sleepless nights, and the moments I questioned whether I was strong enough. And yet, here I was, standing tall, respected, trusted, and loved. Not because anyone had granted me approval, but because I had earned it through action, integrity, and unwavering perseverance. Life, I realized, is a series of tests. Sometimes those tests come in the form of family drama, health crises, or financial strain. Sometimes they are silent, hidden in moments of doubt or subtle betrayal. But the measure of a person isn't whether life tests them, it's how they respond. I had chosen resilience over despair, action over complaint, patience over reaction, and love over bitterness. And through that, I discovered something priceless: my own strength, my own voice, and my own ability to thrive no matter the circumstances. As I looked around the dinner table that night, I saw smiles, laughter, and contentment. My husband reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "I'm proud of you." My children giggled, oblivious to the long journey behind us, but their laughter was a reminder for why every struggle, every sleepless night, every tear had been worth it. And my mother-in-law, once skeptical and critical, now looked at me with a quiet, steady respect that warmed my heart. I realized then that success isn't just about money, property, or accolades. It's about trust, love, and respect earned through perseverance, courage, and integrity. I had faced betrayal, doubts, health crises, sleepless nights, and financial setbacks. I had been tested, doubted, and underestimated. But through it all, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than I ever imagined. And that, more than any material success, was my greatest triumph. After that evening, life slowly began to settle into a rhythm I had longed for but never fully believed I could achieve.
The chaos of family crises, financial instability, and marital tension didn't disappear overnight, but I had learned to navigate it with poise, strategy, and heart. I realized something crucial. Life doesn't hand you smooth roads. You either learn to drive on the bumps or you let them throw you off course. I had chosen the first. One morning, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with my coffee, sunlight spilling across the countertops. I watched my children laughing over cereal, my husband reading the newspaper, and even Megan quietly helping set the table. For the first time in years, I felt a deep, abiding sense of contentment. Not happiness that is loud or performative, but the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you fought for every inch of respect, love, and stability you now hold. I thought about the countless nights sleepless, the health scares, the small betrayals, the times I doubted my own strength, and I realized that all of that pain had been necessary. It had forged me. Pain had taught me patience, struggle had taught me resilience, betrayal had taught me discernment, and every sleepless night had reminded me how much I was willing to sacrifice for the people I loved. These were not just trials, they were teachers, shaping the person I had become. Business continued to grow steadily, but I no longer measured success purely by income or profit margins. Success now meant the ability to create balance, to guide my family through turbulence, to lift others as I climbed, and to make choices grounded in integrity. I started mentoring young women in the community, sharing my story not for praise, but to empower them to navigate life's challenges with courage. I spoke openly about facing judgment from in-laws, navigating marital doubt, handling financial uncertainty, and coping with health crises. And every time a young woman thanked me for sharing, I felt the ripple of my journey spreading farther than I could have imagined. Even the dynamics with my husband continued to evolve in positive ways. No relationship is perfect, and we still had disagreements and moments of tension, but our foundation had shifted from uncertainty to trust. When conflicts arose, we spoke openly, listened intently, and made joint decisions rather than letting resentment fester. Nights that were once filled with anxiety and doubt were now often filled with laughter, whispered dreams, and shared plans for the future. Sleep-deprived nights still happened occasionally, but now they were temporary, not defining. I also began to reflect more deeply on my relationship with my in-laws. The family that had once doubted, questioned, and judged me had transformed alongside me. My mother-in-law, who had once said I'd never fit in, now frequently sought my advice and input. Megan, who had once been critical and undermining, now treated me with a quiet, respectful acknowledgement. And even my father-in-law, whose health had been the catalyst for many of my challenges, expressed gratitude for my dedication and steady guidance. The subtle power dynamics of the household shifted from doubt to respect, and it was a change earned, not given. There were still moments that tested me. The unexpected health scare of cousin, a financial misstep in the property business, or a miscommunication with my husband. But each challenge now felt manageable. I had learned to compartmentalize crises, address them without panic, and make decisions rooted in wisdom rather than emotion. And through it all, I never lost sight of what mattered most: family, integrity, and resilience. One evening, I sat alone on the porch reflecting on the journey from the timid, uncertain person I once was to the woman who had navigated countless trials with strength and grace. I thought about the nights I cried quietly, the times I questioned my own worth, and the moments I felt entirely alone in my struggles. And then I realized something profound. The very struggles that had once threatened to break me had in fact built me. Every sleepless night, every critical remark, every whispered doubt, every betrayal, every health crisis, they had all contributed to my strength. I whispered a quiet thank you to myself, acknowledging the resilience I had cultivated. I realized that true success isn't measured by wealth, accolades, or appearances. It's measured by your ability to rise after every fall, to maintain your integrity when no one is watching, and to support others even when you feel depleted. It's measured by the love you nurture, the respect you earn, and the legacy of strength you leave behind. Looking forward, I saw a life filled with opportunity, balance, and purpose.
I plan to expand the business, invest in the family property responsibly, continue mentoring young women, and support my husband and children in achieving their dreams. I knew there would be more sleepless nights, more crises, and more moments of doubt, but now I faced them armed with wisdom, confidence, and a calm I had never known before. And perhaps most importantly, I knew that no matter what challenges life threw at me, I could handle them. I had proven it time and time again. Not through luck, not through the approval of others, but through sheer determination, perseverance, and the refusal to give up. The woman who had once doubted herself, who had felt small in the eyes of in-laws and critics, who had faced betrayal and sleepless nights, had transformed into someone unshakable. As I closed my eyes that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house and the soft breathing of my family, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced before. Life was not perfect, but it was mine, built from struggle, resilience, and love. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed that no challenge was too great, no obstacle insurmountable, and no dream unattainable. I smiled, thinking of the journey ahead. There would still be family dramas, in-law tensions, and occasional betrayals, but I was ready. I had the strength, the wisdom, and the experience to face whatever came next. And I knew that as long as I stayed true to myself, worked hard, and cared for those I loved, I could navigate life's storms with grace. This, I realized, was the true essence of success. Not just surviving crises, but thriving through them. Not just earning respect, but cultivating it. Not just achieving goals, but becoming the person capable of achieving them. And as I drifted into sleep, finally untroubled and fully at peace, I knew that the story of my journey from doubt, betrayal, and sleepless nights to resilience, recognition, and triumph was far from over. But I was ready for whatever came next, because I had become unstoppable.